Hello students. So we were discussing respiratory system. So let's quickly revise what all we have discussed till now. First, we had breathing and respiration. What is breathing and what is respiration? Breathing is simply intake of fresh air and removal of foul air. It's a physical process. There is no energy released, and it's an extracellular process. While in respiration is a biochemical reaction in which oxidation of food takes place, and ATP molecules are formed. ATP are source of energy, and CO2 is also formed in this complex process, which is released through our lungs. It's an intracellular process, cell inside the cell. Okay. Then next we had discussed like what all respiratory organs in different organisms. So, uh, for example, in sponges, entire body surface is acting as a respiratory organ. In earthworm, the skin is acting as a respiratory organ. In insects, there is separate organs like tracheal system, which is called tracheal system, which acts as a respiratory organ. In fishes or the aquatic animals, uh, these organs, respiratory organs, is called gills, through which they inhale or they separate the oxygen from water and use it. Similarly, in amphibians and in mammals, we had separate respiratory organs, which is called lungs. So we have to focus mainly on this part, human respiratory organ in mammals, because we all are mammals. This we will later on we'll see in classification of animals. In that chapter, we will discuss about the different classification. So human comes under the category of mammals. Okay, human respiratory system. We had different parts like nostril, pharynx, larynx, bronchi, bronchioles, then alveoli. Alveoli are the smallest part or unit of the respiratory system. So if we see through the diagram, starting from the nostrils, these are the parts. Nose, through the nose, the air enters. Then we had larynx, which covers the trachea. Then air enters into the trachea. After trachea, the trachea is further divided into different bronchioles or bronchi. So this is our bronchus, the bigger one. After that, it further subdivided into smaller parts, which are called bronchioles. Then bronchioles are further divided into smaller parts, terminal bronchioles and respiratory bronchioles. And in the end, we had the smallest unit of respiratory system, which are called alveoli. These are alveoli. This is the structure of alveoli. Okay. So we had discussed about the trachea. The trachea is formed with the help of C-shaped of cartilages, so that it's a non-collapsing structure. Means it doesn't get collapsed because of this. Next, next we had to discuss about the pleura. So if you see in this structure here, focus on this structure, this one. If I'm highlighting it with the green highlighter, like these are the lungs. Okay, this part is lungs. Then we have two layers of viscera. One is visceral pleura, two layers of pleura, sorry. So one is visceral pleura and another one is parietal pleura. Visceral pleura is just above the surface of lungs, and these there is a cavity between these two, which is called pleural cavity, and above the pleural cavity we have parietal pleura. So ऐसे समझ लीजिए, like these are two layers. One is visceral pleura and another one is parietal pleura. Visceral pleura is just above the lungs, and inside that there is a fluid filled cavity which is called pleural cavity, and this fluid is called pleural fluid. Okay. Here you have discussed, you can read in this detail, like this is parietal and visceral pleura. So here, what is parietal pleura? Adherent to the inner side of the chest wall and thoracic side of the diaphragm. And visceral pleura is underlying the viscous, adherent to the underlying viscous. Therefore, the lungs are covered with visceral pleura, and there is cavity between these two, pleural cavity, and this cavity is filled with serous lubricating fluid, which is called pleural fluid. So this is all detail about the pleura. So what is the role of this pleura and this pleural cavity? It prevents the friction. It prevents the friction while we inhale or while we exhale. The breathing or the respiration takes place. That time, okay. So respiratory part is divided into conducting part and exchange part. Conducting part, we have nostril, pharynx, larynx, and trachea, where the conduction of air takes place, and exchange part where the gaseous exchange of oxygen and CO2 takes place. Okay. Then we had already seen steps of respiration. First is breathing of oxygen rich atmospheric air, and which get diffused in the alveoli from alveoli to RBCs in blood vessels, and the CO2 which get diffused from blood vessels to alveoli. Okay. Detailed structure we'll see here. Okay, where is that part? So we will go in the sequence later on. When it comes, we'll discuss about that. Fine. So here we had discussed about the steps of respiration. First of all, breathing of oxygen rich air, and exhalation of CO2 rich air, ठीक है, outside. So diffusion of gases across the alveolar membrane, transport. Then next step is transport of gases by blood. First of all, fresh air, it reaches to lungs, and through the alveoli there is diffusion of gases, and these gases uh, get transported through the blood to different parts or different organs of the body. Okay. And uh, in different organs there are multiple cells, and in these cells oxygen is utilized to release the energy in the form of ATP molecules. Then later we had discussed about mechanism of breathing. So mechanism of breathing totally depends on the negative pressure gradient. As we know, the air moves from high pressure to low pressure. So while we inspire, during the process of inspiration, the chest get enlarged, and due to that, there is increase in the volume of lungs, and the negative pressure gets generated inside the lungs. Negative pressure means low pressure inside the lungs, and outside in the atmosphere there is high pressure. So during inspiration, uh, air moves from high pressure to low pressure, from air outside the environment to our lungs. Okay. This was the movement, this was the mechanism of breathing. And here we had seen like what all muscles and other organs which help in breathing. First we had seen intercostal muscles. Because of the contraction of external intercostal muscles, these rib cage gets dilated. Because of that, the whole chest cavity it's get enlarged, and when the volume increases, there is negative pressure, low pressure gets generated inside the lungs. So air moves from high pressure to low pressure, from outside to inside of the lungs. And one more important organ which takes part in this inspiration was diaphragm. So during inspiration, the diaphragm, it get contracted and move towards downward. Okay. And just opposite of that, it happens in expiration, contraction of rib cage and upward movement of diaphragm, their upward movement of diaphragm. Okay. So we had discussed till that topic. Now next we have to discuss about various respiratory volumes and cavities. What are respiratory cavities and different definitions we have to discuss. First of all, you have to remember this one instrument which is called spirometer. Spirometer is used in calculating the respiratory volumes. So first respiratory volume is called tidal volume. What is tidal volume? It is the volume of air inspired and expired during normal respiration. Simply, whatever air is inspired or expired during normal respiration, while we are sitting in normal position, there is no hard work we are doing, no exaggeration, and in normal position we are inspiring. So the volume of air which get inspired is called tidal volume. It is around 500 ml in volume. Okay. The next volume is inspiratory reserve volume. The term itself is saying reserve volume, means it's above the tidal volume. Tidal volume से extra, reserve form में. So it is the additional volume of air a person can inspire by forceful inspiration. Tidal volume was in normal inspiration, there was no forceful inspiration, no expiration. In inspiratory reserve volume, what we have to do, forceful inspiration we have to do. हमें ज़्यादा एनर्जी लगा के और फोर्सफुली और एक्स्ट्रा एयर जो हम खींच पाते हैं, दैट इज कॉल्ड इंस्पायरेटरी रिजर्व वॉल्यूम. सो द वॉल्यूम ऑफ एयर ए पर्सन कैन इंस्पायर while forceful inspiration, sorry. And what's the volume of that? It's around 2500 to 3000 ml. It's the capacity of that. What next term we have is expiratory reserve volume. Similarly, like we have inspiratory reserve volume, so the opposite of that is called expiratory reserve volume. Like when we forcefully expire the air outside the body is called expiratory reserve volume. So additional volume, extra volume of air a person can expire by forceful expiration, it is called expiratory reserve volume, and its value is around 1000 to 1100 ml. Okay. Next term we have is residual volume. What is residual volume? The term itself is telling residual, means which is extra, which is always remains extra. So volume of air remaining in the lungs even after forceful expiration. What is volume of air remaining in the lungs even after forceful expiration? जो वॉल्यूम एयर का अपन के फोर्सफुल एक्सपिरेशन करने के बावजूद भी एक्स्ट्रा हमेशा जो फेफड़ों में या लंग्स में प्रेजेंट रहता है, that is called residual volume. And what is the value of that? It's around 1100 to 1200 ml. Okay. So with the help of this graph we can see different volumes. Like here we see tidal volume. So this is normal volume which a person is inspiring or expiring, that is called tidal volume. Then inspiratory reserve volume we had seen, it is extra volume a person can inhale during forceful inspiration, that is called inspiratory reserve volume. Similarly we have expiratory reserve volume. Here this one is expiratory reserve volume. Extra volume of air a person can exhale during forceful expiration, that is called expiratory reserve volume. Then we had residual volume. Residual volume is what? The volume of air which always remain inside the lungs even after forceful expiration, that is called residual volume. So हमने देखा simple terms में if we see like this amount, 1 second, ये तो हमारा नॉर्मल जो हम इंस्पिरेशन और एक्सपिरेशन कर रहे हैं वो वॉल्यूम. फिर हमने फोर्सफुली जितनी ताकत हो सके उतनी लगा के और ज़्यादा एक्स्ट्रा जो एयर हमने खींची फोर्सफुल एक्सपिरेशन से, दैट इज इंस्पायरेटरी रिजर्व वॉल्यूम. तो ये एक्स्ट्रा हुई, ये तो नॉर्मल हमारा इंस्पिरेशन था और उससे इतना ऊपर हमने एक्स्ट्रा लिया, तो ये तो इंस्पायरेटरी रिजर्व वॉल्यूम. सिमिलरली एक्सपायरेटरी रिजर्व वॉल्यूम ये था जहाँ हमने फोर्सफुली एक्स्ट्रा वॉल्यूम को बाहर निकाला एक्सपिरेशन में. ठीक है, एक्सपिरेटरी रिजर्व वॉल्यूम. And residual volume is called, what is residual volume? Residual volume is the volume of air which always remain inside the lungs even after the forceful expiration. आपने एक्सपिरेशन कर लिया, उसके बाद भी कितनी भी ताकत आप लगा लो, लेकिन कुछ अमाउंट जो एयर का वो लंग्स के अंदर हमेशा प्रेजेंट रहता है, दैट इज कॉल्ड रेजिडुअल वॉल्यूम. सो इस ग्राफ की हेल्प से वी कैन सी द डिफरेंट डिफरेंट डायमेंशंस. नाउ we will see few more terminology like inspiratory capacity. What is inspiratory capacity? Inspiratory capacity is tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume. मतलब inspiratory capacity is like the maximum volume a person can inhale. सो मैक्सिमम वॉल्यूम तो आपको जब ताकत लगा के, एक्स्ट्रा ताकत लगा के जो एक्स्ट्रा फोर्स एयर आप अंदर इनहेल कर रहे हो उसको भी काउंट करना पड़ेगा. तो टाइडल वॉल्यूम तो नॉर्मल ही हो गया जो हम नॉर्मल रेस्पिरेशन कर रहे हैं, प्लस इंस्पिरेटरी रिजर्व वॉल्यूम जो फोर्सफुल हमने इंस्पिरेशन किया था. तो इन दोनों को मिला के जो टोटल कैपेसिटी बनती है ड्यूरिंग इंस्पिरेशन, इट इज कॉल्ड इंस्पिरेटरी कैपेसिटी. सिमिलरली वी हैव एक्सपिरेटरी कैपेसिटी. एक्सपिरेटरी कैपेसिटी, expiratory capacity is tidal volume plus expiratory volume. It is similar to inspiratory reserve volume but it's just opposite to inspiration. ये जो inspiratory capacity थी वो inspiration के टाइम पे, जबकि expiratory capacity वो expiration के टाइम पे. Expiratory means tidal volume plus extra volume जो forcefully हमने expire किया, that is called expiratory reserve volume. तो टोटल दोनों को मिला के expiratory capacity. ठीक है. फंक्शनल रेजिडुअल वॉल्यूम, नेक्स्ट जो टर्म है फंक्शनल रेजिडुअल वॉल्यूम, इसका जो है ये है एक्सपायरेटरी रिजर्व वॉल्यूम प्लस रेजिडुअल वॉल्यूम. हमने यहाँ देखा था एक्सपायरेटरी रिजर्व वॉल्यूम प्लस रेजिडुअल वॉल्यूम, तो इन दोनों को मिला के ये दिस इज कॉल्ड फंक्शनल रेजिडुअल कैपेसिटी. फंक्शनल रेजिडुअल कैपेसिटी, ये दोनों को मिला रखा है, देखिए यहाँ से और यहाँ तक. देन व्हाट इज वाइटल कैपेसिटी? वाइटल कैपेसिटी इज द मैक्सिमम वॉल्यूम ऑफ एयर ए पर्सन कैन ब्रीथ इन आफ्टर ए फोर्सफुल एक्सपिरेशन. तो इसमें कौन कौन से पैरामीटर्स आ जाएंगे? वन इज एक्सपायरेटरी रिजर्व वॉल्यूम प्लस टाइडल वॉल्यूम प्लस इंस्पायरेटरी रिजर्व वॉल्यूम. So this diagram, no, you have to learn it very carefully. With the help of this diagram you can define each and every term. Now the final term is total lung capacity. Total lung capacity means terms itself is defining total means maximum air which can enter inside the lungs. तो इसमें we can add all the parameters like residual volume plus expiratory reserve volume plus tidal volume plus inspiratory reserve volume. That is called total lung capacity. It is the maximum lung capacity of a person. ठीक है. अब these definitions which these are very helpful while we see different lungs capacity. A normal person having low capacity of lungs, while a athlete person, a sportsman having the extra capacities. All these tidal volumes, residual volumes, they get increase in a athletic person. Similarly, if some person having some disease of lungs like TB, pneumonia, then these capacities gets decreased in all these diseases. Fine. Next we will see the exchange of gases, key where these exchange of gases takes place and how these gets transported in the body. So starting from the mouth, like from you can see from here O2 and CO2, like O2 it gets inhaled through the nostrils and trachea and it reaches to alveoli. So this is alveoli, and from the alveoli it gets diffused into blood. Here oxygen यहाँ से blood vessels में diffuse हो गया. Then through the blood, one second, through the blood it's gets transported first to heart, then from the heart, you know that heart is the pumping organ of the body, and from the heart the blood gets circulated to the whole body. So from lungs, with the help of blood, the oxygen it reached to heart, and then heart pumps the blood to all other body. So from this diagram we can see from heart the blood is getting pumped, and the oxygen reaching to the different cells. Here if we see, if suppose this is the cells, then here oxygen is getting diffused from blood vessels to cell. And here we had seen that respiration takes place like oxidation of food and ATP molecules gets released. Okay, and then similarly now this we had seen like this was the transportation system of oxygen. Now we see that CO2 it's formed in the cell, and from the cell it gets diffused to blood vessels. Then these blood it carries CO2 to heart, and through the heart it goes to lungs, and through the lungs with the help of alveoli it gets diffused in the trachea, and then through the nose it's get exhaled to the atmosphere. So this is the whole circulatory system of gases, oxygen and CO2. And so this is the most important diagram. You have to draw it very carefully. You have to label it like, see, these are the alveoli. This is the pulmonary system. These are systemic circulation, means blood का circulation जो होता है, and these are cells. And how the oxygen gets transported to different cells, and how the CO2 get transported from cells to lungs. This whole diagram you have to draw. ठीक है. So here we had seen like exchange of gases occurs by a simple diffusion. What is diffusion? Diffusion means uh, movement of gases from high pressure to low pressure. So that is called diffusion. Movement from high pressure to low pressure. And this I think we had discussed in last class how the alveoli and the RBCs they transport or they diffuse these oxygen and CO2 with each other. Like if oxygen is present here, then it get diffused to blood vessels, and in blood vessels it gets attached with RBC. And similarly, if CO2 is there in blood, it gets diffused to alveoli. So this is the diffusion of gases, diffusion of oxygen and CO2. ठीक है, ये diffusion and oxygen and CO2. Then one more definition is partial pressure. What is partial pressure? Partial pressure is the pressure contributed by individual gases. Like the pressure of simply oxygen is called PO2. PO2 means partial pressure of oxygen. Similarly, PO2 of CO2 is partial pressure of CO2. So this term is very important, partial pressure. Okay. So the movement of gases takes place from higher partial pressure to lower partial pressure. ठीक है, हायर पार्शियल प्रेशर टू लोअर पार्शियल प्रेशर. तभी तो हम देखते हैं कि इफ ऑक्सीजन की कंसंट्रेशन इज मोर इन लंग्स, देन बिकॉज ऑफ हाई पार्शियल प्रेशर ऑफ ऑक्सीजन इट गेट डिफ्यूज्ड टू फ्रॉम एल्विलाई टू ब्लड, बिकॉज ब्लड में ऑलरेडी कंज्यूम हो चुका है, तो उसमें ऑक्सीजन की कंसंट्रेशन कम है, CO2 की ज़्यादा है. जबकि एल्विलाई में एयर से अंदर ऑक्सीजन ज़्यादा आ रही है, तो एल्विलाई में ऑक्सीजन ज़्यादा है तो वो डिफ्यूज होगी कहाँ से, एल्विलाई टू ब्लड. Then we discussed this diagram, we already discussed the respiratory membranes. Like here we have alveoli, this is alveoli, and this is basement membrane of alveoli, or here we have blood capillaries, and there are two membranes between these. One is basement membrane of blood vessels, and here we have alveolar wall, and diffusion of gases takes place in between them. ठीक है. Next we'll see that the on the molecular at the molecular level, like how oxygen and CO2 it get transported. So blood is the medium of transportation of CO2 and oxygen. Most of the oxygen, 97% of oxygen, it gets transported through RBC. मैंने आपको बताया था, here we had discussed about the RBC. These are the RBC. Like RBC, they carry oxygen and CO2. So 97% of oxygen or oxygen it get transported through the help of RBCs. Okay, and remaining 3% by plasma. What is plasma, what is RBC? This all cells and structure of blood we will see in circulatory system later when we'll discuss that. And if we talk about CO2, 25% of CO2 it's get transported with the help of RBC. 70% of CO2 as the in the form of bicarbonate. Bicarbonate is formed in blood vessels. Okay, and remaining 7% is in dissolved state by blood plasma. So now we have to look about the transportation of oxygen here. Suppose this is RBC, this is the structure, this whole round structure is RBC. Okay, so in this RBC we have hemoglobin molecules, HB. So hemoglobin in the RBC it get combined with oxygens to form oxyhemoglobin. Hemoglobin plus O2. So this is called oxyhemoglobin. And one hemoglobin molecule it get attached with 4 oxygen molecules. So binding of oxygen is related to the partial pressure of O2 and CO2 that we had discussed already. Then percentage saturation of hemoglobin and partial pressure of oxygen form sigmoid curve. Sigmoid curve we will discuss one second here. Suppose this is y-axis, this is x-axis. So if we draw a diagram of oxygen binding capacity with hemoglobin, so this will be the curve. It is called sigmoid curve. In this y-axis we have to draw oxygen binding capacity with hemoglobin, and on x-axis we have partial pressure of oxygen. So in the beginning, like the oxygen binding capacity, if partial pressure of oxygen increases, so first the oxygen binding capacity with the hemoglobin it gets increased. See here it's getting increased. It's almost at the right angle. एकदम बढ़ जाता है, पहले ऐसे हॉरिजॉन्टल, फिर एकदम ऑक्सीजन बाइंडिंग उसकी बढ़ जाती है यहाँ तक. लेटर व्हेन द सैचुरेशन हैपेंस, देन आप पार्शियल प्रेशर ऑफ ऑक्सीजन का जो है कितना भी बढ़ा लो, लेकिन आपका एक पर्टिकुलर कैपेसिटी के बाद में देयर इज नो इंक्रीज इन दी ऑक्सीजन बाइंडिंग कैपेसिटी विद हीमोग्लोबिन. So this is called sigmoid curve. Okay. In the alveoli, PO2 is more and CO2 is less. That we have discussed. जहाँ पर partial pressure of oxygen का ज़्यादा होता है, that's why the oxygen it get diffused from higher pressure to lower pressure from alveoli to uh, blood vessels, and within blood vessels RBC, these cells of RBC are present, and inside the RBC hemoglobin molecules are there, and this oxygen get bind with hemoglobin to form oxyhemoglobin. ठीक है. And in the tissues, this all these all process what we had discussed, it's at the level of lungs, at the level of alveoli, and just opposite of this happens near to the tissues or at the level of cells, where oxygen it's get dissociated from hemoglobin. इसका जस्ट उल्टा होगा इस तरीके से, लाइक ये एल्विलाई के लेवल पे था, बट टिश्यू के लेवल पे जस्ट उल्टा होगा. ऑक्सी हीमोग्लोबिन से ऑक्सीजन और ये हीमोग्लोबिन सेपरेट हो जाएगा. ठीक है. Now if we see about the transport of carbon dioxide, that was about the transportation of oxygen. The carbon dioxide is transported by hemoglobin as carboxyhemoglobin. Okay, these terms you have to learn. Oxygen was transported as the form of oxyhemoglobin, but CO2 is transported in the form of carboxyhemoglobin, कार्ब अमीनो हीमोग्लोबिन है ना. In the tissue PCO2 is high because tissue में there is a consumption of oxygen and CO2 is released. That's why because of this release of CO2, the concentration of CO2 is more. So that's why this CO2 gets diffused to blood vessels, and inside the blood vessels, because of high pressure of CO2, it favors the binding of carbon dioxide with hemoglobin. And how this whole reaction happens with the help of carbonic anhydrase enzyme carbonic anhydrase. Okay, just look this diagram very carefully. Here suppose this is RBC, this is a whole red round structure is RBC. Okay, so yeah, CO2 is present in plasma. One second, if these are tissue or cell, so here CO2 is formed because of oxidation of food, and this CO2 is diffused to blood. So CO2 is now present in plasma, and now in the plasma RBC is also present. So that CO2 get diffused to RBC, and with this CO2 gets combined with H2O with the help of carbonic anhydrase enzyme, this enzyme, and what is formed? Carbaminohemoglobin. Carbaminohemoglobin. Okay, and at the level of lungs, when these RBC get transported to the level of alveoli, what happens? This carbaminohemoglobin, it get dissociated to form H plus molecules and HCO3 molecules. This HCO3 is called what? One second. So this carbaminohemoglobin, it gets dissociated into H plus and HCO3 molecules, and HCO3 molecules, it's get diffused in plasma. Similarly, this H plus molecules, it's get combined with oxyhemoglobin HbO2 to form HHB, and oxygen is released. So here this complex mechanism with the help of this anionic balance, this hydrogen plus ion and carbonic anion, this complex process it gets happens. Okay, next like this was the whole process about like how diffusion of different gases it takes place at the level of alveoli, at the level of RBC. And next like how the breathing rate or respiration is getting controlled. So next topic we have to discuss is regulation of respiration. So one most important organ you have to remember, which is called medulla oblongata. Our medulla, it's the respiratory center where the control of respiratory rhythm takes place. When we will discuss nervous system and brain, then that time we will discuss the what are the different parts of brain, medulla, pons, cerebrum, like that. So that medulla, it controls the respiratory rhythm. Okay, respiratory rhythm center बोलते हैं इसको. And similarly pneumotaxic centers in pons. So you just remember this diagram. Uh, this is very complex diagram, but you just remember two terms, pons and medulla. This is pons and this is medulla. So medulla is respiratory rhythm center, rhythm को जो control करता है, and pons are pneumotaxic center. Similarly, chemosensitive areas near rhythm center is highly sensitive to CO2 and oxygen. So one point you have to make it very clear that oxygen plays very less role in controlling the rate and rhythm of our respiratory system. The main role is played by the concentration of CO2. If CO2 is more in the body, then the signals are transmitted to brain, and with the help of medulla और रेस्पिरेटरी रेट विल इंक्रीज. उसके बाद हम जोर जोर से ब्रीदिंग करेंगे ताकि ज़्यादा ऑक्सीजन अंदर जाए और CO2 बाहर आए. तो CO2 का मोर रोल रहता है इसमें टू कंट्रोल द रेट एंड रिदम ऑफ रेस्पिरेशन. ठीक है. Next, what are the functions of respiration? Functions may we have discussed like energy production in the form of ATP, oxygen oxidation of food takes place and ATP is released. Another function is maintenance of acid base balance. Here we had discussed that H plus ions it is acidic and carbonic ion this is basic. So it maintains the acid and basic structure of the body. Then maintenance of temperature. अगर जल्दी जल्दी ब्रीदिंग करेंगे तो द टेम्परेचर ऑफ द बॉडी गेट्स इंक्रीज्ड, सर्दियों में जैसे होता है. तो नाउ वी हैव टू डिस्कस different diseases of respiratory system. First we have asthma, second emphysema, occupational respiratory disorders like silicosis, asbestosis and pneumonia. These disease or practical part we'll discuss in next class. Mountain sickness also we'll discuss in next class. Here till now we have discussed the complex structure of breathing, respiration, about the circulate the different volumes, of how the gases get exchanged and transported in the body. Next we had discussed about the transportation of oxygen in the form of, one second,